All right, and we're on.
All right, oh wow, hello. I sound good. I like this. Welcome everybody. If you are going to take a chair, please take a chair, but don't take it with you. We do have to return these somewhere. I know, I'm all set for today. All right, my name is James Lenhoff, and I'm the Vice President of Housing Development at Aeon. And thank you so much for coming out to this first inaugural event for the groundbreaking 3-day event that we have here for The Rose. We're very excited with our co-development partner, Hope Community, to be opening up this building, not just for panels, not just to have discussions, not just as an experiment, but to change this intersection, to change the way we're looking at affordable housing development, and to think much more long-term when we're doing these sorts of projects. We're very excited to be part of this project and with all of our partners. Today, as hopefully you know, if you're in the right room, and there is no other room to go to, you are here to learn about Living Building Challenge 101 and energy conservation. Really, what is LBC? What is the Living Building Challenge? How did Aeon get on this track? Why are you sitting here today hoping to learn something? With that, it takes other people to get these projects done. And so we have 3 panel members here with us today. Billy Weber, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Sustainable Building Research and Director of the Master of Science in Architecture Sustainable Design track at the School of Architecture at the University of Minnesota. It actually jokes on here, I wonder how well that fits on a business card. That's a good joke, actually. He's also a researcher and project manager of the Minnesota Sustainable Housing Initiative, which is a McKnight-funded knowledge base of tools and case studies to advance sustainability and affordable housing. We have Reese McPherson, our rock star architect. I wrote that. He is an associate and a project manager with Minneapolis architecture firm MSR, where he's worked for numerous community projects and cultural facilities. He's also worked on addressing housing needs for battered women and the Project for Pride Living Eco-Village design charrettes. He has also participated in the McKnight Foundation Forum on Affordable Housing, also known as a rock star. All right, and then Pat Alois Young, straight in from Colorado a couple days ago, is an associate professor of psychology and co-director of the Center for Energy and Behavior at Colorado State University. She is a principal consultant at Kairos Consulting, and in both her research and consulting, she focuses on applying the principles of behavioral change from social psychology to the domains of health and energy. With all of the focus on this building, we can't forget that people live here, or will be living here. So we talk a lot about the structure, we talk about the wall systems, and we talk about the LED lighting and the healthy materials, but it's for people, and her team is helping us really figure out the best way to help people learn about this building and engage with us. So I think as many people here know, or should know, Aeon has been around for almost 30 years. We'll have about 2,400 apartment homes by the end of this year. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that the word Aeon, being the Latin form of Aeon, means forever. And that is something that we take very seriously in our work at Aeon, not just in our design, but in our financing and our community involvement, working with our residents. And I think it is particularly apt to this project here. This is a forever project. We didn't do this to be here for the next 5 or 10 years. We worked on this project with Hope Community and the entire intersection to be here for the next 50 years, 100 years, 150 years and beyond, which is why we were heading down this route. Just a little bit of backstory. Although Aeon had had an increasing recognition of the importance of sustainability, energy efficiency, going back all the way to East Village and probably before in Elliott Park, we really started thinking even more about this in 2005 when we connected with Billy Weber at the Center for Sustainable Building Research and embarked on 3 pilot projects related to new construction, substantial rehab, and moderate rehab. And some folks in this room worked on those buildings and know them very well. And we made great strides. Hopefully that's nothing that we needed to keep. We made great strides in stormwater management, in reducing some of the energy use, not so much in reducing the water use, though we really tried. We started looking at solar thermal, which is on the building right over here. We're not brand new to all the things that we've been thinking about, but we weren't quite seeing the results that we wanted to see. We really wanted to look even farther out to the future, and with the work that we were doing, Looking out the next 20 years at the portfolio today that we have, standard sort of energy price increases, we were looking at least another 130 million of utility expenses over the next 20 years. There's much better ways to be spending that money and thinking about upfront costs versus long-term benefits to both the residents, the organization, and the community. So we headed down this path and started doing some researching, and Gina Saganic from our office, who wasn't able to be here tonight and is now advancing national endeavors related to healthy buildings, we came across this program, stumbled perhaps, and one of the things that really grabbed our attention was this quote: "What if every single act of design and construction made the world a better place?" That's ambitious, it's big, it's bold, and it's something that we thought was particularly important. Now, as we started down the track, we started to realize, wow, that could be really, really expensive. Some of the LBC projects out there were 300, 500 or more per square foot. We don't have resources to be able to do that, so we had to take a step back. We had to think about what is a way that we can be replicable, that we can be scalable, that we can share information. And we framed our choices around that, being inspired by LBC, taking those lessons, sharing knowledge, getting the right folks on the team to understand what can we do here. And they'll be telling more about what actually LBC is. And in fact, a big part was finding the right partners, getting the right people on the team so that we could get to the point that we're at today of standing in this building. And we're very excited to have our partners here today. And Billy, would you like to come up here and talk about LBC?
Well, I would love to.
If you can get up from the chair.
Okay. Must use mics. Hello. So I'm not sure where to stand here now.
That's fine.
I can stand in front of Reese. So I love this, the 2 slides back, 3 slides back. Thank you. The moment that Gina decides we should do an LBC building. I love telling this story because it's really a true story. Gina called me and said, I found what we're going to do next after the 3 pilots. She said, we're going to do an LBC building. Let's do a Living Building Challenge building. And I said, you're nuts. We can't do that. The next morning I called her back and said, sure. How should we do it? What should we do first? Nobody really knew what the LBC was at the time. It was really new. This is 2010 when we had this conversation. And we were just going to try and figure it out and get started. So, always game for an adventure. So, we started talking about the LBC and what is it. And way back in 2010, some of you may remember who were around, we actually held some listening and envisioning sessions, educational sessions called The New Shade of Green. So we'd done the 3 pilot projects. We actually were over in what is now the expansion for the childcare across the street. And we held 3 learning meetings. The first of which was to educate people about it. The second, which was to get people to start to engage and explore. And the third was a charrette, where people got together and tried to figure out what it meant physically, what a building like this might look like. And we had a broad stakeholder group. So it wasn't just architects and engineers and affordable housing advocates. It was also contractors and folks from the city and folks from the state, educators from the school system, really just kind of a broad array of folks coming together to try and figure out what this meant. The metaphor of the flower, which is kind of where the LBC takes off from, it gets back to this idea of rooted in place and placemaking. The idea behind the LBC overarching idea is that it should be a building that makes all its own energy, collects all its own water, and processes all its own waste. We're going to hear today about where we've advanced in the roads and where there's still room to grow. But it really is this overarching holistic idea. And if you're familiar with LEED or green communities or some of the other processes out there for sustainability, the LBC is not a checklist. So it's not about collecting points, it's not about like we did this, it's not prescriptive. It's really about creating a specific methodology and understanding how that relates based on your team, based on your location. The solution is different everywhere. So there are no prerequisites except for you have to do it all, okay? We didn't do it all, but we did a lot. The goal that Gina and I talked about straight out was to make the best project possible. So we really weren't obsessed with the idea of obtaining an LBC building. We were really going back to the roots of what Aeon does, and that is every project should be the best project that it can be. And we also approach this as a not if, but how proposition. So it's really easy to look at a requirement list that includes net zero energy, net zero water, restorative requirements for the biosphere. I'm not even sure what that means still today, how we were going to do that. But it's really easy to say, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it. And instead of doing a process of can't, we really wanted to focus on how. So it really started to set a tone for the design team. We also talked about effectiveness. Often in sustainability we talk about efficiencies, but how can we really be effective? It's not about doing less bad, it's starting to do good. Time. So 5 years since we started this project, really, and it's actually 15 years, I think, since the Four Corners project started. And we're just getting started. It's a 100-year, 200-year building, right? 5 years is really just a blip, even though it doesn't feel like a blip today. Scale. What are things that we can achieve at a building scale, at a community scale, and at a city scale? So we really talked a lot about these issues as we went through, and you'll kind of see in some of the solutions that we're scale jumping. There's certain things that we can't do on site that we're doing across scales. Finally, kind of in this, our thinking about this, decision-making, prioritizing goals and outcomes. It needed to be simple, affordable, replicable, and an appropriate fit. And we were really looking for a sweet spot. We weren't looking always for the ultimate solution, but the optimal solution. So we talked a lot about that as we worked through the design process and the design exploration. And I had to have at least one of these in here. Be like, how did we decide what was what and track stuff? Lots of diagrams and sheets that look like that.
And that's the abbreviated.
That's the abbreviated one. That's right. That's the cheater sheet. That's the like 1 page, which actually is 3. But anyway. So what's the Living Building Challenge? Very briefly, the Living Building Challenge is a set of 20 imperatives that you must meet that are organized by 7 petals. There are 4 typologies, so you can do a renovation project, landscape, building, or neighborhood. And we're in the building category here. And then they are further organized by transect. So what is a transect? It has to do with, are you in an urban situation or are you in a rural situation? So we are actually in a general urban zone. And then scale jumping. So if you can't solve it on site, can you solve it collectively across the community? Very quickly, I'm going to go through the petals. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the petals that Reese isn't going to talk about. Reese is going to talk about energy and materials specifically, which are 2 of our emphasis areas, but I am going to talk about some of the other successes for the project. At the site scale, which is our first petal, talks about density, urban agriculture, an idea of habitat exchange, so you're buying offsets of land, and car-free living. We actually did really well in the premier site opportunity, and the expression of the site petal for us is going to be the community garden when it's installed next year, sometime this year or next year. One of the requirements is for urban agriculture, which required us to have a garden on site, a certain percentage of the site. It's the most visible sign, I think, as we come down Portland of the Living Building Challenge in the project. In addition to that, we also did many things that are restorative about the site and the landscape, including what is being installed now, how the green infrastructure is going to work, meaning plants and trees, as well as how the blue infrastructure is going to work. So the water that comes off the roof of these buildings goes into tanks underground, some of which is going to be pumped back out to water the gardens, other which these moat that you kind of see will be filled in with dirt and planting, is also part of our water system. So our water control system is really integrated into our landscape. Water. The idea in the LBC is that you have net zero water, meaning you collect all your own water, you process your wastewater. For a lot of feasibility and technical reasons, this was going to be an obstacle we knew early on we weren't going to make. The systems had an upfront cost of $2 million and an annual operating cost of $200,000. For a project like ours, that's really not tenable. So we sought to reduce our water use and our impact on energy for domestic hot water heating And what we have achieved, and will hopefully come out the proof in the pudding, of course, or the running, is that we've cut our watt. Ooh, I got a liter still in there. I'm translating between metric and imperial units here, sorry, I missed one. But it is not 35 liters, it's 35 gallons per person per day, which is about half of the national average. So it's pretty good. And it's through a lot of careful fixture selection, and it's an annual water cost savings of almost $7,000. In addition, as you know, as you come in, you can see our solar hot water heaters are on the banners. Another really visible sign. Net zero energy, Reese is going to dig into this. I won't. I will just say that we've made significant progress in this area. Really amazing. A couple of these kind of get linked together. Health and materials, certainly an overlap, and Reese is going to talk a lot about materials, but there are a couple things to say about health. A lot of them have to do with equity and access to daylight, thoughtfulness of design. So one of the things that is part of the criteria is civilized environments, which is a lot of glazed, big windows were part of that solution, operable windows were part of that solution. Our air filtration system and our mechanical system part of that solution. Really being aware of how we relate to our environment. Another concept is biophilia, which is connecting to nature. And again, our landscape, our balconies, our bump outs in our units, our large windows, all of this help to connect us to nature and cycles of nature, including the water cycle that'll be visible on site. Again, materials, Reese will talk about. Equity is an interesting one. It's the sixth petal, and we didn't tackle equity as a single petal. We asked in each of the petals, of the other petals, what the equity question was going to be. Where is equity expressed in this? Equity is not something that we thought should be relegated to a special area. There were good ideas embedded in it, but when we're designing energy and water efficient buildings, there are a lot of places where there's potential conflict with how people are going to live in their units. And we really wanted to take those things into consideration as we made those decisions. A lot of the material choices and indoor environmental quality choices are really hinging on equity. How can we provide healthy environments for families? Finally, beauty is the seventh petal. The idea in the LBC when we started, which was some time ago now, and has evolved, was that you should have things that are for the sole purpose of beauty. And we really took that on and said, we think that things should be multifunctional, that everything should be beautiful, and it shouldn't just be about a specific thing being beautiful only for beauty's sake, but that beauty should be embedded in everything that we do. So we kind of thwarted that one a little bit, turned it on its ear. And now we got Reese.
So there's kind of two pieces that I think are very important that follows up on what Billy was saying about equity and also with water. We had very deep discussions with the Institute, and one of the nice things about that was we actually began to influence part of those decision processes. So the nice thing is out of kind of the affordable housing conferences and some of the other things that came out of there, the Living Building Challenge has modified some of its requirements now for affordable housing based upon outcomes and research that we've been doing on this project. So I think that was actually a really big deal because we weren't just taking everything at face value, we were also challenging it and asking a lot of questions, which has informed a lot of things.
And I'll just chime back in right away, particularly on equity. So that the approach to equity has really changed for LBC. The equity requirements we felt were less than potent when you're talking about
they were more checklist oriented, actually.
When you're talking about net zero energy and net zero water, and then you come to equity, and it's like, well, try and do a good job. And so they've actually reformulated how they approach equity, and it has gotten much better teeth. I think it still has a ways to go, but it calls for projects to invest in their communities, to invest in other nonprofits that are in their areas. Much the way that the energy pedal requires a buy down of carbon, there's some of those things that are starting to actually potentially have impact and move things forward. It's particularly important, not so much for a project like the roads, which is really all about equity, but for projects that are, have budgets of $500 a square foot for, a little pavilion. I shouldn't say that on tape, but for a small boutique kind of project, as they sometimes get referred to.
There's a couple of projects at $1,000 a square foot.
Yeah. So anyway, but energy and materials.
We are not at $1,000.
No, we're not even close.
So I thought I'd start off with this slide, kind of bring us back to winter, because that's really what a lot of our decisions we're talking about here. So, usually we always frame our buildings with these really pretty summer views, but we wanted to actually talk about what does it mean to live here? What are the challenges of designing for housing in a cold climate with a humid summer? So the 15 on the left there that corresponds to 15 bad snow days a year. That's our average. 53 is the number of days where we have 0 degrees, where it goes down in a typical year. And 17 is the typical span, so like not last year, but the year before, where we had 17 days in a row where it was 0.
Or below.
Or below, yes, or below.
Let's not forget that.
So the question mark in the guy's head there is what's my utility bill going to be like after experiencing all that? And then the 10 is kind of the remembrance that there are 10 perfect days in Minnesota. That's not the state fair. It's actually from the charts that talk about what are the perfect days for that meet everybody's bioclimatic needs of perfect humidity. And, so it's about 10 days. Yeah, why do we live here? It's for those perfect 10 days.
Yes.
They're a great 10 days.
Yeah, they're great 10 days. So of course, these were some earlier graphics that we did talking about the Phillips neighborhood, kind of its location. You can kind of see the 2 bars over here where our site is. We're bounded by the 2 freeways, and so there's a lot of things that come about that are talk about the neighborhood scale, city scale, and kind of where we are. Kind of more importantly is looking at our temperature graphs and stuff. So we have a 130-degree temperature swing, and that's what we're designing our systems to do. It's a harsh climate. Today, it doesn't feel that way, but there is 130 degrees that we have to design for. This was a slide that Billy had put in, and I still bringing it up again because what's important about this is what Billy had said earlier is about finding the sweet spot. And that's really where a lot of our decision-making process had to come from in trying to find simplicity, trying to be affordable, trying to be replicable, and finding the best fit. All those things have to find a sweet spot. You can't just throw money at it and assume that that will fix the problem. The organization of the building, the parking level on the far right is a C shape. We have the 2 bars in the building. The two buildings are spaced such that it's designed for daylight and passive solar heating strategies so that both facades are daylit in the December months. Right now it's equinox today, so it's a perfect 12-12. But in the wintertime we know it's not, and we know we get 7 hours of sunlight. So we really want to maximize that sunlight opportunity and create great spaces still. Because we do live with winter, and we still want this to be a great place even in the winter. Safety at night is a big deal for this neighborhood, so we really talked a lot about how do you create safe, great places to inhabit at night. We know that nighttime it's also a great time to think about celebrating places in the city. Nighttime can be very dynamic. So in looking at the energy systems for the buildings, we did a deep dive analysis on 23 different kind of wall types in which we looked at 3 common filters of EUI, dew point, and
you better explain the EUI.
Yeah, so I was about to explain the EUI. So EUI, the simplest way to think about EUI is like your car with miles to the gallon. So that's kind of one way to kind of think about it. So it's a measurement of kBTU per square foot. So it's the thermal energy that is being expended through a furnace as it's migrating out through the wall. So it's basically your gas, what a lot of people think about like their gas bill or their electric bills.
Except for lower is better.
Yes, lower is much better. So kind of talking about the kind of organizations. So again, in finding kind of these sweet spots, what we were looking at was running through how do we how do we get the most EUI performance out of the wall system, have it not cost a lot, and also make sure that we're properly managing condensation and the dew point through the systems. Because we could make a very thick wall, but it can be very expensive and it may not actually manage the water properly. And looking at what is constructible with schedules and timing and stuff like that. So this is a series of diagrams talking about that. The biggest thing about this is that all the wall system in the envelope includes the windows, includes the roof. So with all of these things, you kind of go through it again and again. So I had mentioned about with the walls, we looked at 23 deep dive analysis on the walls. With the ventilation systems, we actually looked at 14 different scenarios of ways of heating and cooling this building. And again, tried to settle in on finding those sweet spots. So with that, we arrived at looking at solar thermal, which is kind of the billboards and the front entries of the buildings, which make up these pieces here. And they're sized for doing about 35% of domestic hot water. We reserved the roof space for future PV solar, and that was one of the strategies for the building. And then more importantly is we then looked at our variable refrigerant flow, which some of the people saw on the tour today. And what that is a split system that energizes from the roof, talks to a series of control modules. But basically what all of that does is it really is a very efficient way of delivering heat and cooling to the units. There's also a dedicated outdoor air system to the building, which are basically the lungs of the building. We have high air particulate matter because of the two freeways. And so we're really looking at ways of bringing fresh, healthy air into this environment. And what that does, what we did there was we actually took a little bit of an energy hit from that because we felt it was very important to bring in the most amount of fresh air we could. So we're actually twice over base code for supplying fresh air. What does that all mean? That means that we came to about a 75% energy reduction over a baseline building. So I'm going to go to this slide. So in here, when we were kind of looking at some of the baselines of 119 to 111, green communities was kind of putting us in here, which is kind of the threshold that we need to meet for funding requirements. When we look at the Minnesota SB 2030 challenge, which is about carbon reduction, they would state that we needed to be at an EUI 52, so it's kind of like miles a gallon. And right now, where we're designed at, we're at 31. In looking at putting PV on the roof, what's kind of interesting about that is even with putting PV on the roof, it still only brought us down to an EUI of 21. Now of this, of course, we're trying to get down to 0. And so there are steps to get there. And one of the challenges we had with the site is, so this is our site, and we did a series of analysis for PV. And basically what we found is that the array, to do this, even with 75% energy reduction, we basically have to go from Franklin here, go across the entire site, go across the street, and actually hit the houses on the other side in order to still be at a 75% reduction with solar energy, with PV directly on site. So we're looking at other strategies of community solar as potential viable solutions for that. What that all kind of means is that there's kind of this, again, the sweet spot of where you kind of get to here, where it's relatively easy to get to this point in the 50 kind of range of reductions, but then going into this zone here means having to really simplify and really ask deep, hard questions about how you're going to make those further cuts and reductions. And actually, there is a zone in here where we're finding right now, based upon the density of the units, you know, we could have done one thing where we took and said everybody's only going to have one bathroom, and that would have really reduced our energy, but it's not very livable either. So it's looking at kind of those kinds of things. We could also have put in card keys too that restrict your access for electricity, but that's also not very friendly either. So with the PV and kind of moving forward, we're hoping that eventually we'll be able to get down to that net zero goal. Now looking at kind of materials on the building, so our first our first kind of foray into this was looking at the material list for LBC and thinking, oh my God, a normal specification for a project, 5,000 plus materials to kind of sift through, try to figure this out. And we knew that this was going to be a problem budget-wise to do this. So we decided to step back for a minute and ask the question, where are people spending all their time typically? So then we began to really ask and look at the interior dwelling units of where people are spending the time on the floors, what they're touching, and looking at a kind of more holistic viewpoint of what starts from the inside out rather than starting with the structure of the building and looking at our material use. Again, so passing them through a series of 3 filters. One is the red list, then responsible industry, and then source location. The first one is really where we spent the bulk of our time. And red list is a series of chemicals that have been identified within, I'm going to go to, what is that? Maybe I didn't put that in. I didn't put that in. Well, it's actually over here. So there's a series of chemicals that have been identified. So in 2.0 and 2.1 versions where we started the project, there were 13 identified chemical groups: asbestos, lead, cadmium, mercury, some of the other ones that kind of know that are kind of big no-nos that we wouldn't want to use anyway. But where the bulk of the new materials are really going are after phthalates, vinyls, and other kind of PVC type materials. Since we have been working on the project, the red list is advanced now to identifying an additional series of prohibited materials as well. So that list of 13 has now jumped up to 35 that's been addressed.
And why are they prohibited, Reese?
Well, they're prohibited because they're bad for us.
All right.
I mean, that's really the simple answer is, it used to be where a lot of things that we thought were bad for us, we could kind of see, and we knew that black smoke was bad. We knew that, what typical poisons were. And the issue is a lot of the things that we're finding in a lot of our building materials are things we actually can't see. So we don't know what's in there, and there's been very little disclosure by the industry of what's actually in our materials. And these aren't things that are going to kill you right away. It's over a long period of time and being around them. So we knew that asbestos was the wonder material for a while. It was slathered on everything, and suddenly not so great. Same thing with PCBs. They were great. They did some really amazing things with them. And everybody loved lead for a while. That was the cat's meow. I mean, we slathered lead on everything. Now there's a nice industry of taking that all off. So I'm looking at the red list, and then responsible industry is kind of where is the industry being good with what they're doing? Are they actually disclosing things? Source location, where are materials coming from? So with LBC, they want you to pay close attention to how far materials are coming because there's embodied energy with that. We looked at 40 material categories. I'm not going to read all of this, but basically everything kind of inside the dwelling unit, from the wall structure in, looking at the wall board, the paint, the flooring, and the doors, the windows and stuff. So we really began to ask what's in the material, making sure that we're trying to keep those materials out. The process, what we found was the due diligence is simple when a manufacturer has disclosed its information, but the issue is the majority had not. And so when we were starting to get results back, we were finding over 50% of the industry refused to even give us an answer on what was in the materials. So then we said, well, we're not going to use them. That's kind of the short and simple answer of it, is don't use it if you can't figure out what it is. This is a tracking sheet of our process for the red list. And so this is kind of looking at what we call kind of deeper shades of green. The original tracking list provided by the Institute is not color-coded or anything like that. And we actually found we were having a really hard time talking about what the materials were, what was good, what was not great, how to track exceptions. Because one of the things is right now on the list, there aren't enough materials to build a building with yet. It's coming, Even in the past 6 months, there's been huge advances, and now there's actually furniture that's actually on declare, and we've been able to actually now with the FF&E package of this building actually bring in several products that are actually red list free, which is great. And 6 months ago, that didn't exist. So there is a really nice trend in the project. This is a diagram of the materials that we're looking through. So again, making sure that our wall textures had no PVC material in them. Traditional wall texture has 20% vinyl dust in it, which makes it fast to dry. Zero VOC paints with zero VOC colorants, it's a really big deal. Trying to make sure that our cabinets and wood trim had no added formaldehyde, looking at FSC wood with those, using solid surface for kitchen and bath countertops, again, no formaldehyde, and also making sure our countertops are radon free, and then looking at our flooring choices as well. Then we took that logic and applied it actually into the common spaces. So like in the space that you see here, we were able to actually then afford, at no additional extra cost, getting LBC compliant carpets throughout, which was a really big deal. The wall paneling that you see here is also a Columbia Forest product that's a core board. So again, its glues are red list compliant and it's formaldehyde free. It has no additional formaldehyde on it. The carpet that you see in the main lobby area has recycled goat hair in it. So there's a lot of interesting kind of things that have come into the space. And yeah, recycled goat.
They were fine with it. The goats were fine with it.
No goats were harmed
In the recycling of their
In the recycling of their fur. Anyway, and then kind of ending off the kind of the garden shop, because that's really kind of what it's all about, is creating a great, healthy place to be.
I just want to chime in again.
Sure.
A couple things about the process that the intention that was put together by the team and the process and the amazing work that was carried out by MSR on the materials side. When we began to talk to the Living Futures Institute about the approach to the materials list and how we were going to tackle it, nobody had started from the inside out before. And it was a bit of a no-brainer for us. It's like, where are people most likely to be impacted? Where can you create the greatest good was the surfaces that people come in contact with. And apparently a typical project starts with the major systems and works their way down as opposed to the surfaces and systems that people are exposed to. So again, it was another conversation with the Institute about our approach versus the typical approach, and kind of engendered again some additional really great conversations with them and with the other folks who are trying to do this kind of thing across the country. So
A lot of deep discussion.
And the clicker.
and the clicker.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned about the slide with the numbers on it, because my son just started at Hamlin. And we have more than 10 perfect days in Colorado.
That's a narrow definition of perfect.
It's a narrow definition of perfect, yeah.
Meteorologically perfect.
Meteorologically perfect, yes.
Okay, so I'm Pat Lejeune, and I'm from more than 10 perfect days in Colorado. I'm part of the behavioral engagement team at Colorado State University, but I'm very happy to be here today. So the Rose is going to be unique, and Risa and Billy talked in great detail about the planning that's gone into this project. But at this point, you could take the same building materials and you could take the floor plans and you could build an identical structure, a twin, so to speak, here in the home of the Minnesota Twins. And even if you did build an identical structure, the Rose would still be unique. And the reason would be the people who are soon going to be moving in and making this building their home. That is what is going to make this building truly unique. It's the people who are going to be living in this building. But when these people move in, there are going to be doing things in the building. Each individual unit is going to be different, and more than just the paintings that they hang on the wall and the furniture that they build, that they bring into the building. Each unit is going to be different, and the important differences for us are going to be how they're actually living in those units, because we know that from research that people in multifamily buildings like the Rose, or even people who live in the very same houses, can actually have energy bills, water bills that are 3x different. And so when we want to have a building like the Rose, where we are building to the Living Building Challenge standard, where, you know, this has been the perspective that has, you know, that has driven this entire project, right? So this is where we've come from the beginning, and, you know, this has been years in the making. We know that behavior, after the doors are open, behavior is going to be a huge part of the puzzle. And so this is why we are part of this team, because the people, after the doors are open, are a very, very important part of what we need to consider. So once the doors are open and the people start moving in, behavioral engagement is an important part of the puzzle. So for instance, here in Fort Collins, where I'm from, we had a LEED building, it was a high school, that was actually performing worse than a 30-year-old high school in terms of its energy use, which was absolutely shocking to the school district. And the reason was that they expected the building to be doing all the work. They didn't think about the people who were in the building, all right? So engagement is absolutely critical if we're going to be meeting these challenges. Because one of the key differences between LEED and the Living Building Challenge is that when you build a building to LEED, it's based on in terms of the energy and the water use, simulations and models. And we know that models and reality can be very different. So at CSU, in the Institute for the Built Environment, we have an integrated sustainability management perspective that we use in order to engage people. And the integrated piece is one of the most important aspects of this. So there are 4 pieces of the puzzle that I want to go through, and I want to talk about how those play a role. So we start out with a facility, and we've talked in great detail about the Rose and all of the thought and planning that has gone into making this state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind facility, right? So that's where a lot of people stop. They build the building and they let everybody move in, and they don't think about it anymore. Well, you know what? In my world of academia, if you get 25% on a test, that's a fail. And you know what? If you do that here, that's also going to be a fail. So that's one piece of the puzzle. So you start out with a great facility, and that's terrific. But now what you want to do is you want to think about your organization. So here what we have is we've built a great building, and now we're going to have a whole bunch of people come into that building. Well, think about this organization. What you are doing when all these people move in is you are building a neighborhood. Yes, you have a neighborhood around here, but you also have a neighborhood in this building. What's this neighborhood going to be like? Is it going to be a welcoming, warm, inviting neighborhood where people feel that they can talk to their neighbors, where they have the ability to derive social support? Because we know that actually that's important for some of the outcomes that are part of the Living Building Challenge. In terms of health outcomes, having social support from your neighbors is actually really important. And that's something that we can do with engagement, right? So we can set the stage as people are moving in for the Rose as an environment where people know each other, where they can call on each other, where this is a place where the expectation is that people help one another. All right, so this is an organization where those sorts of outcomes that are part of the Living Building Challenge are actually more likely. When we think about operations, some of the things that we do in our work, sometimes we have to kind of retrain operations. But again, when we think about the integrated piece, we want to think about how occupants and operations go together. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to empower our building occupants to feel that they can tell operations when there are things going wrong, right? Because they're the eyes and the ears in the building when things are not operating properly. So we need to also get the operations folks to listen. And sometimes that's, challenging, right? I hear a little people in the background. So these are all the things that we do with engagement, all right? Because in order for the building to be functioning at its highest efficiency, those two pieces need to be handshaking properly, all right? So this is engagement. And then the occupants. Well, we need to teach them about the building. This is a one-of-a-kind building. It has an HVAC system that they're not going to be accustomed to. We need to teach them how to operate that HVAC system so that they're not thwarting its efficiency. So these are all the things that engagement does, so that those models of the water usage, of the energy usage, they're actually going to come to pass. And then the people who live and raise their families in this building will actually derive the benefits that the building was designed to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you to all the three speakers for discussing. We do have a few moments here for a Q&A, which is great. I want to come back to one of the slides here, and I think it's really important to understand the partner aspect of this and all of the folks that were involved in many different aspects of getting a project like this done, and really all of Aeon's projects that it takes with many of our partners. And I like ending with Pat's part here, talking about the human component, because at the end of the day, what we've all accomplished here is, yes, a phenomenal building, yes, changing an intersection, hopefully a neighborhood, but it's a place where people can sleep. It's an opportunity to have home that we need so much more of in our community. And that, at the end of the day, is one of the big things that we're able to do here as a group, is provide another opportunity around that. Questions?
It's all so clear.
Okay. Just, is there anything you had to give up in the process that was really the hardest thing? Like
The
one or
hardest
two?
thing.
Take one to get to. Yeah.
That's the hardest thing to do. How do you really
All right, so what I'll talk about is, with the process of the building, all of the systems are so integral to each other that when we were having discussions on budget of, do we scrap DOAS, the dedicated outdoor air system for the building, that would have been a killer. And we quickly realized that these things were so interwoven that you couldn't just take one thing out and be okay with it. And so everybody fought hard for those things. And I think that that was actually one of the more successful outcomes of the project, was that people began to really realize how integrated all these things were. It wasn't just, oh, well, we're going to just delete a couple of surfaces. That wasn't going to get us back into the budget. We had to really think real hard and deep about what each mechanical system was doing, what was going to be its best sweet spot. And yeah, it would have been great to put 100% solar thermal capacity on the building. However, in talking about operations, that creates another kind of nightmare unto itself, because then those pieces that have to be managed by somebody almost on a daily basis of making sure that you're not making so much hot water, now suddenly you have to dump all that hot water. Where are you going to put it? So, right now I don't feel like we're actually lacking for anything in the project, which is actually pretty amazing.
I think I would maybe a different tack. I think rather than what's left out, we kept talking about trying to make the first building of the next generation of building. And so that has always kind of been my goal line. It's like, are we pushing things enough? Are we learning enough? Are we understanding enough that this isn't the last really great building of the last era, but the first pretty good building of the next era? And I think that some of the goals, including the energy reduction and the water use reduction, integration of the landscape across the site, how that integrates with water, it's a blueprint, and it's embedded with a lot of the spirit and the ideals of the LBC, even though it doesn't achieve the LBC. So I think, I'm the one who's always like, well, we'll know in a year to 18 months how it went. It's kind of, we really it does need to get up and running, and in the meantime, walk into a unit. They're beautiful places for people to live. I mean, it's kind of amazing in and of itself, just as a building. But I think we're there. I mean, I think we've made a different kind of a building.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Actually, I don't feel like we're lacking for anything.
Yeah.
Going back to the early parts of the design phase, and then Alan, I'll come over and get your question. We had tried to get more community spaces in the building, and for budget constraints, energy constraints, that proved to be a challenge. We wanted some larger fitness areas, some larger community rooms to allow some more programming, but we still ended up with great spaces. But earlier, we had tried for more.
Well, and good urban spaces. So we're like, we can see the intersection and the communication, and these were other goals. It wasn't just about that performance goals.
So all four of you have actually said, James talked about replicability. One of you said proof will be the pudding. You just, Billy, said, we'll know in 18 months a little more. And Pat, of course, you talked about depends on operations and the people who are living here. So can somebody talk a little bit about our metrics and our systems of measurement? Because if we're going to replicate it, and if we're going to push the envelope to others around the country, and to ourselves for that matter, then we have to have a way of measuring to see, gee, we thought this was a good idea in 2014 and 15, maybe in 2016 or 17, maybe we'll realize some of the stuff we did maybe was not so good of an idea.
Yeah, and measuring was big on this project.
Do you want to talk about metering, or?
Do you want to talk about metering?
I can talk about it.
Basically,
Basically,
we're metering.
We're metering. We metered the hell out of everything, basically. But we have a very extensive metering system. So all of the electrical systems are fully metered. There's integration components with the DOAS system. There's a full building automation system. There's another integrated element with reporting, and then also with the Mitsubishi VRF system, there's a really nice interface with that. We're also metering all the water, and what else? Hot and cold, and also metering on the solar thermal as well. So we'll know exactly kind of what things are doing. We also put leak detects on things too, so we know that if we're having worst offenders, that'll kind of pop up, and we kind of see what that is, and hopefully
Or malfunctioning.
or malfunctioning equipment, things like that. But I think those are some of the ways that we can kind of electronically look at things. And a lot of it is going to come from resident engagement too. You know, in our energy modeling, for instance, we put a very healthy plug load into that building, into this building. So that EUI 31 that we've been hitting, 12 of that 31 is plug load, and that's about what people are using on a daily basis. And if we can encourage better behavior and reductions, we'll start seeing better results too.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for coming to this first event for the Rose. Hopefully, all of you can come also on Friday when we actually have the big grand opening. We'll have a great event here that day. It starts at what time, Alicia?
11:30.
Starts at 11:30 here at this site where the grand opening is at. So thank you so very much for being out and being such great partners.